Hello, everyone. So, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure you're all winding down for Christmas, so hopefully not causing you too many problems for taking half an hour to 40 minutes out of your busy schedules today. Hopefully it's going to be worth it. Today we're going to talk about internal fraud with a specific reference to payments and payments processing. Internal fraud as well as external fraud have been proved to be steadily on the rise the last few years, and we'll take you through a couple of examples of how businesses have been hit really hard. Some of them really are businesses you wouldn't think could fall prey to this type of fraud. I hope you're going to be able to take some important lessons away. Make sure that you apply them within your business, and hopefully you won't be one of those businesses that fall prey to internal fraudsters. We're looking at about 30 to 35 minutes for the presentation, with about 10 or 15 minutes at the end. I'm sure we won't need all that, but if you've got any questions, we'll be here to answer them. So please hold them until the end, and we'll get cracking. So just a bit of an introduction to the subject matter today, really. So we're going to go through some different types of internal fraud. As I say, it's going to have a specific reference to payments and payments processing. We'll take you through a really interesting graphic on why your employees may be motivated to commit fraud, what might make them want to do it. A couple of high-profile examples of some really significant losses that businesses have suffered as a result of payments fraud. Some recommendations on generic sort of best practices and rules that you can apply in order to prevent your business from suffering from payments fraud. And finally, a quick little reference to protecting your staff and business from external threats. I think the penultimate point there is very, very important for businesses from sort of SMEs all the way up to big multinationals, because although we're going to be talking about the threat from within today and specifically sort of malevolence from your staff and your employees, bear in mind that there are all sorts of external threats. Often an easy way through the door for an external fraudster is by duping your staff. So it doesn't always mean that they've been malicious in the way that they've behaved, but you know, there can be accidents, people make mistakes, and we don't want these fraudsters to be able to succeed in taking money or diverting money from your business. And we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end, as I said. So let's get started. So what's internal fraud? Well, clearly it's a fraudulent action of somebody who works for you at its most simple terms. It can also be known as employee fraud, and there's loads of ways people can do it as well. Given that we're going to be talking primarily about payments today, I'll take you through a couple of the ways in which it can be employed. But what can it lead to? Well, clearly the biggest way that payments fraud or employee fraud can affect you is your bottom line. If people are trying to defraud you and take money from your business, that's money that's going somewhere it shouldn't have been going, and it's only going to affect your profits. It can also get you into legal issues as well. You know, if you need to pay a supplier, or you need to pay your tax by a certain date, or any other kind of business payment, and that payment doesn't arrive because it's been sent somewhere else, you know, it could get you into hot water with whoever that person is who was expecting money on that particular day. Clearly there could be a damage to business reputation as well. You know, if a business is known to have let one of their employees defraud them to the tune of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of pounds, it can only look bad for that business not employing the appropriate internal controls and processes, which really every business of every size should be doing nowadays. It can result in low employee morale. So if you divert somebody's salary payment and they don't get paid on the day they're expecting it, especially in the run-up to Christmas, that could be crippling, especially for low-income workers. And finally, and this will have particular reference to one of the examples we're going to go through today, it can make you go out of business. So there's a nice little stat there at the bottom. This isn't referring to internal fraud, but the more wider definition, I guess, of what fraud can cost to the UK economy. There's some research done by Experian, I think this was back in October, fraud costs the UK economy £193 billion per year, which works out roughly £6,000 per second. So if you think this is something that's happening few and far between, if you think this is something that you're never really going to fall victim to, well, just look at those numbers. So I'll take you through some of the different types of employee fraud now. So this is the main one, this is the headliner, asset misappropriation. It's the one that's going to most directly affect your bottom line. And really, it's the theft or misuse of an organisation's assets. It's not always to do with cash, but really that's the main one we're looking at today. So there's theft of cash, there's false invoicing, accounts receivable fraud, and payroll fraud as well. And you don't have to look too far on the internet to find some good examples of all of them. Next one, fraudulent statements. So we see this, it's also sometimes known as corporate fraud, when a business is dishonestly exaggerating the amount of money they're taking in, maybe to mislead investors, maybe to, to carry out any other type of fraud, really. If a business or an employee of a business is fraudulently estimating the amount of money they have or have taken in or have sent out, then it's another kind of fraud. So overstated revenues clearly is one. If you're trying to exaggerate the size of your business, or you're overstating your revenues because you've creamed some of that off the top, it's clearly a fraudulent action. Same with recording fictitious sales, incorrect valuation of assets, and creating fictitious receivables as well. Third one is something that we're all aware with. Anyone who watches the news, you don't have to look too hard to find an example of corruption on a corporate level. So it's fraudulent conduct by those in power or those with a certain level of responsibility, and that's going to be a key theme today, actually. It's around what level of responsibility is appropriate for each of my employees and where should I draw the line. But especially in the large corporate world and for councils and public sector bodies, corruption is a real big theme and something they're very, very against. In the public sector, it's because it's our money. It's our taxes that are going amiss or awry, and things like bribes, kickbacks, improper use of confidential information to gain a financial advantage, conflict of interest and collusive tendering. They're all kinds of internal fraud that we see. And if you look at Action Fraud, the website, which is run by a quasi-governmental body, you'll find some great examples of all of those. But I did mention at the top of the session, we're going to be looking at this with particular reference to payments fraud, and that would fall into the banner of asset misappropriation. Before we do that, why do they do it? Clearly, if you ask any man on the street, why would people commit fraud against their business? The main one is going to be because they want more money, because they might say they're greedy, they might say they're under a bit of financial pressure. So that's the top box we can see on screen there. There's so many reasons why somebody can be under financial pressure. Addiction, drug or alcohol addiction clearly is one. Living beyond their means, that might fall into the category of the greedy people I mentioned a short while ago. And recouping losses as well. So if anyone with a particular gambling problem or anyone who's perhaps made bad investments might look to their employer as a way to recoup that money that they've lost. So financial pressure is one of them. Rationalization, I think this is a really interesting one. I think, an employee might think, well, okay, I'm gonna divert a payment of £500 to myself this week. I know I'm getting paid next week, so I can put the money back in. It's when the employee starts to try and rationalize, will go, I feel like this is an acceptable way of, I feel like this is an acceptable reason for doing what I'm doing. Feeling they deserve more as well. I don't think there's an office in the country where there's not somebody who's moaned about their salary not being high enough in the past. And the third one I think is really key. I actually added this one into the fraud triangle by Dr. Donald Cressy. I think revenge is a very interesting one. Anyone who feels affronted or mistreated, especially if they work in finance, there's a high likelihood that they might want to pay themselves a little bit of money as a bit of recompense. I think the main one, though, for everybody on the webinar, I think the main one is around opportunity, and this is the way which you as finance and systems and IT, I guess, professionals, this is the way where you get most control. This is the one you can prevent, because if they don't have opportunity to defraud your business, they don't have opportunity to divert a payment to their own bank account, then it's going to make it a lot harder for them to actually do it. So poor internal controls is a real big one. You know, businesses of all sizes should be looking at internal controls as a way to stop people actually having the ability to do this. Poor supervision as well in the same way. Again, you're going to see a couple of examples where poor supervision has led to massive financial losses from businesses which just didn't have the framework in place to put a stop to this. And the third one is a bit of arrogance. It's knowing you won't get caught. You know, if you have poor controls, if you have poor supervision, there's a high likelihood that a member of staff would go, well, do you know what, I know I'm not going to get caught. There's no controls, there's no supervision, so I'm going to try and get away with this. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea around what would motivate a member of staff to actually try and do this. So let's look at a bit more at payments fraud in detail and look at a couple of examples. So payments fraud is any fraud that involves falsely creating or diverting payments. Anyone working for a business will have come across in some way, shape or form the notion of a purchase ledger or an accounts payable team. And the bigger ones generally have real strict controls around who is able to go onto that ledger. And the reason why they do that is because any approved supplier or approved business which is on the purchase ledger, you know that you've been through a certain due diligence process before you're able to send a payment to that organisation. For that reason, many people will say, well, you're on our purchase ledger now, but we won't do a payment for 2 weeks while we look into you as a business. And I guess part of the reason why they do that is while we check that those bank details are actually yours and not one of our member of staff. So creating bogus customer records for anyone who doesn't have those controls around accounts payable is an easy way for a member of the accounts payable team to send themselves a load of money. They'd usually do that by creating a bank account. So you might put a real company in there who is due an invoice or is due payment from you. But they might put their own bank details in, this member of staff who was feeling particularly fraudulent. So trying to put internal controls around that is an easy way to stop payments fraud. And we've covered that with point 2 as well. It's intercepting and altering payee details, whether that's on a cheque or an accounts payable order. And what they're trying to do there is they're trying to take a valid invoice, put their own bank details on there, and when your company believes you paid that invoice, you've actually paid a member of your team. Processing false claims by accomplices for, you know, benefits, grants, repayments. I think the false claims one's quite interesting because a member of staff in your team who wants to pay themselves a load of money, they might not always send it to their own account. They might send it to a family member or a friend, and I guess that's a slightly easier way to avoid detection, because self-authorizing payments to oneself, you know, it's an easy way for a business to look at this and go, well, do I have these bank details on record? Oh yes, I have them in the payroll system. We know that as a member of staff. So I think that's why paying other people might be an easier way for people to get around this. Let's look at some examples though. There's some high profile ones and there's some really big losses which businesses have suffered. So first one we're going to look at is the Cardiff Council employee. So we are able to share these slides after the webinar if you like, and there's a URL at the bottom there so you can go away and look at this. There's a member of staff who was feeling under financial pressure, like we saw in the fraud triangle. They'd been living beyond the means, they were under pressure, the bailiffs had been called, and this member of staff was in charge of the petty cash account. It was one single account, she held complete control over that, and they were meant to be only sending cheques or payments out from this account to a max of £100, given it was the petty cash one. So I guess what the council thought was, okay, well, our liability here is minimalised. You know, we're happy to give sole control of this to this member of staff because we only do payments out for £100. And £35,000 was stolen in bogus cheques by this employee who was in financial difficulty. I have to say allegedly, the court case is going on at the moment, but given the inflammatory language that's been included in the article you see there below, it seems highly likely that this person has carried this out. You'll see in point 2 there that there were 76 cheques written in total. All but one of them had been countersigned by a colleague. You know, there's been absolutely no reference to the culpability of this colleague, but it shows you that, you know, when somebody is in a position of power and when somebody asks you to sign something off, I guess human nature is you're probably not going to question your boss, are you? You're probably going to go, okay, boss, let me sign that for you. And then that person was able to go away and cash those cheques. The line manager was quoted as saying, "We had a good working relationship. She seemed honest." And I think that's a very important point there, because just because you've known somebody for a while, just because somebody seems honest, there is no reason to have such a lackluster control over what you allow your staff to do. And the final point I think is the most damning. For the bank statements, for this particular petty cash account, they've not been reviewing them for years. And that allowed this person to carry on defrauding the council, carry on making payments. She had control of one account, one sole account, and was able to withdraw 35 grand. Interestingly enough, you may have noticed that they were later found to be £42,000 overdrawn. I think you get some idea of how well Cardiff Council run their team, but the £7,000 difference was written off as an accounting error or something along those lines. Let's look at another example of payments fraud. So there's a cooker manufacturer up in the northwest called Glendimplex. And excuse the pun, but the employee had been cooking the books for 5 years. I think point 2 there really gives you a bit of an insight into who can get away with this sort of stuff. So the employee there was made purchase ledger supervisor in 1985. She bode her time. 20 years later, in 2005, she began to steal money from the company. And over 5 years, she stole £2.8 million. Again, this is all referenced from the web address down there below. She falsified bank statements and falsified supplier payments. So not only did she create false records there in the purchase ledger system, she sent payments to herself, and I believe it was her sister as well, or her daughter. So she made those payments to a false record. She also falsified the bank statements, though, and that allowed her to dupe auditors when it came to auditing them at the end of the year. Those bank statements were unchecked by senior management. So what they believed was what they saw there on paper, and they had no reason to doubt until 5 years later, the company accountants realised that 2.8 million quid was missing. She was a long-standing and highly trusted employee. You can see there 25 years she was purchase ledger supervisor. She had free reign over adding suppliers to the purchase ledger and submitting payments. You know, you wonder what would allow somebody to do that, to have free reign over adding who is in the purchase ledger database and also decide then how much you pay them. So clearly multiple signatories might have been a way around this. But ultimately, you're only as good as the data you have in your accounting system. Let's look at another example. So this one was really interesting. This was the ex-finance manager of Hull University Students' Union. It is a charity. This person stole £800,000. He went undetected for 13 years. And he did it in a very similar way to the lady from the previous example. He raised regular invoices for suppliers. They were going straight into his personal savings account, and nobody was checking who owned that account. This was really interesting, though, because it led to 11 employees being sacked. All staff lost their bonuses, and I think the real kick in the teeth for Hull University Students' Union was that this finance manager was a member of the steering group who decided who would be being sacked and how they would cope with the loss of funds. This was all before he'd been caught. The charity would have almost certainly closed without the backing of University of Hull Students' Union. And you see at the bottom there, he was known as a man of good character. So I think this is really interesting to see how people saw their employees, and then later when the dust had settled, just how much they were getting away with defrauding their businesses. I'll go through a couple of recommendations now. So we've talked about finance systems, we've talked about payment systems, we've talked about some best practices. So I just want to take you through a few of those that we at AccessPay have learned from speaking to thousands of people over the last couple of years and just asking about the way their finance function operates. The first one I would expect everybody who works in finance and IT to be acutely aware of. If you're not, you might want to look at it very soon. It's quite obvious. It's segregation of duties. The more eyes you have checking something that is correct, the more likely you are to detect it. But it's not just about when sending payments. Anyone using online banking, usually it's quite rigid, but you are able to define multiple signatories and mandate that one person alone cannot send a payment. But there's other areas you can employ this. So when you add a beneficiary to or an approved supplier to your accounting software, a lot of accounting systems have the ability to say, well, we cannot let one user have sole control over who goes into this database. So employing segregation of duties there gives you a better chance of thinking, well, is this right? Who is this person? What are we paying them for? Especially for Hull University Students' Union. For 13 years, they thought they were paying a regular supplier, and nobody asked them what they were actually paying them for. And that's because the finance manager there had sole control over who they were paying. This is a really interesting one. When a beneficiary changes bank details as well, you should always verify that one of these people is changing their bank details. And you should verify that it's true. If you have a regular supplier who says they're moving bank, it could always be a member of your staff who's just going, yeah, they've changed sort code and account number. We've got to pay them by this method now. And very soon you're going to have a supplier banging on your door saying, where's my money? The last one's quite interesting, I think, as well. I think it's probably always good to have a separation between the people who are doing the payments and the people who are reconciling statements. In the example of the lady at the cooker manufacturer, she was not only adding beneficiaries to the accounting system and making the payments, but she was also able to then intercept the bank statements, falsify them and edit them, and make it look like nothing was going wrong. Another one, segregation of visibility as well. I think the point at the bottom there, the more they know, and this is, it's all about least privilege, because if you've got a long-standing member of staff and they know everything there is to know about your internal processes, think about the bottom section on the fraud triangle. It's not just about internal controls. It's not just about lack of supervision. It's knowing they'll get away with it. So if somebody knows too much about the way you operate your payments process, they've got a much better chance of being able to defraud you, I guess. But segregating visibility between payroll and accounts payable, I think, is always a useful exercise if you can. Many companies outsource their payroll to a third-party payroll bureau, which I think, if you're not of the size where you can employ a full-time payroll clerk, it's a great thing to do, because you've got a very clear line in the sand there between your payroll operations and your purchase ledger operations. Monitoring and access control. So anyone from an IT background, I know we have a couple of sort of IT professionals on today, something you'll be very familiar with is role-based access control. Making sure that anybody's access levels are appropriate to their role but are defined by their role. If you have an accounts assistant, their permission levels and what they can do within your software, within your banking platform, within your payment software, should befit their level of seniority. But it's not perfect. Everyone we've just talked about pretty much was a manager in some way, shape or form. So we know it's difficult for people to question their managers, but having multiple stages of approval and roles which befit their level of seniority, I guess, gives you a better chance of cutting these things off at the head. But a very important thing for anyone from a systems background is for you to take responsibility, I guess, for the audit trail and for looking at who logged in, when did they log in, was it 3 different people that were involved in the submission of this payment, or was it only one? Should that be a red flag? Why were people logging into the payment system at 7 o'clock at night, for example? Does that seem normal? So looking for anomalies in access times or looking for anomalies in the amount of times people are logging in with relation to their job role, I think is a good way, it's a good red flag. And obviously for the techies on the call, you know, strong password and reset policies across the business. We've heard horror stories from our existing customers, you know, who say, oh, well, I've not changed my password for years, I can't remember them, you know. If somebody knows you've not changed your password for years, it's not very hard for them to shoulder surf, you know, watch what you're putting in when you log into your systems and pretend to be you, I guess, and make payments under your name. And another one, very interesting, we're seeing this a lot in many different web applications at the moment, is two-factor authentication. So when somebody logs in, they don't just need a username and password. Often a password will be text to their mobile phone, which could be a business phone, for example. An email may be sent to their email address where they have to click a link and go through a verification process. Two-factor authentication is going to enable you to make sure that whoever this person says they are when they're logging in, that it's actually them, especially if it's tied to something like somebody's mobile phone. This is a really interesting one because especially smaller businesses, when they export a payment file from their accounting system, say a Sage system, they might download it to their desktop. They might then go away and log into online banking and upload the file from the desktop. They save it to the desktop because that's the easiest way to find it. But really, wherever it's saved to on your network, if it's in an unprotected location, that person can take your accounts payable file or take your payroll file, go into Excel or Notepad and change the bank details to their own. And then when it comes to the approver a bit further down the line, well, they might see, you know what, this is the same amount of transactions, this is the same value of transactions that I was expecting, so I'll approve it. So being able to stop users from having the opportunity to manually intervene with files which come out of your finance systems is a good way to just, I guess, give them less of an opportunity to tamper with these files and commit internal fraud. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. I've mentioned a couple at the bottom there. Secure STP, so that's a file transfer program which many of our clients use to send us files. And what that means is when they export a file from their accounting system or payroll system, it goes straight into a folder on their network where nobody can get at it, and it's automatically sent into the AccessPay solution. So what it means, nobody has the opportunity to tamper with that file. And you could also do it using an API, for example. So we hook in with a lot of systems which people use for their accounting and payroll operations. This one's a really interesting one. So a lot of companies have HR policies, and especially, you know, this is something which IT really need to take charge of. So if you've got a formal leavers and joiners policy, it means that you can have timely revocation. So you can remove access to systems, cancel smart cards, change people's roles as soon as they leave, sorry. So if you have a member of staff that's perhaps been sacked or made redundant, you need to make sure that your IT team, in conjunction with your HR team, is removing any of the access they had to your internal systems. You know, a member of staff that's just been sacked or made redundant, I believe, would be a little bit more likely than some others to try and commit internal fraud as a parting gift, I guess. Making sure that you have reviews and frameworks around your internal processes, around reviewing access, reviewing privileges. Try and do it on a quarterly basis. Not everyone has the opportunity to. Some larger enterprises will do it weekly or monthly, but making sure there's a formal framework in your business for reviewing who has access to what are they able to do, and can we limit this? And asking yourself the question, do they need access to the system? Do they need this level of access to do their jobs? And finally, encourage whistleblowing as well. You know, it's something that you see in many large corporates. It's something that should, I believe, be employed throughout the business sector, regardless of the size of business. Make people comfortable that if they spot something's gone wrong, that they shouldn't be afraid of declaring it to the manager or to the managing director or whoever that might be. To give you an idea of one horror story which a client of ours went through, it was a school, and their IT manager left after, guess what we could call heated discussions with the headmaster. They didn't get on. The IT manager left. He retained access to all the systems which he previously had. No one had taken that off him. And he went on and hacked the school website, wrote a load of really defamatory statements about the headmaster. It was obviously very, very embarrassing for them. You know, if they had a process where another member of the IT team or a member of the operations team perhaps could have said, well, oh, you know, Jack, the school manager's leaving today, shall we make sure we take all his access away? That would have avoided that. And I think, as I said at the end there, it's a good job he wasn't in the finance team, because if you've got a member of staff and you don't revoke their access as soon as they leave, they may still have the ability to pay themselves a load of money and disappear to the Caribbean with it, and you might never see them again. Automation can help you to a point. You know, we offer solutions which you don't need to even log into, that you can export straight from your back office systems all the way through to BACS or to the bank. But you need to make sure that your back office is geared up for it. So that's why I said it can help to a point, but it shifts the focus then into your back office systems as the central source of information. And you've got to make sure that everything in that system, you've got to make sure there's integrity of that data, I guess. So your accounting and payroll systems, therefore, if you're going to employ these best practices, you need to make sure they have the ability to handle the segregation of duties we discussed earlier. Okay, so that's a couple of examples with regard to payments fraud, a couple of ways in which you can employ best practice in your business. But I think that's a very important point. You know, the threat from within doesn't stop at payments fraud from your employees. Your employees could always be duped by an external fraudster. As I said earlier on, there may be no malice, but people make mistakes. So I'm just going to take you very quickly through a couple of examples of how you might be able to better protect yourself against that, with a couple of the more common, I guess, themes we're seeing in external fraud and how these fraudsters are trying to dupe your employees. So invoice redirection is a very big one. I mean, we at AccessPay have had loads of people try this on us. Luckily, our systems and processes, at the very least, are set up to verify and change your bank details. But the idea is that you get you've had a hacker in your internal network. You know, he or she knows that there's an invoice due for a certain company. So they'd spoof an email. They would make it look like it came from that particular company, and they'd say, oh, sorry, I've changed my bank details. Please, can you pay me into this account? Now, if your staff don't have the nous to go, oh, well, this feels a bit wrong, I should verify this, I should call them, then you may be in for a big loss, because once you've sent that money, there's a high likelihood you're not getting it back. One of the bigger ways we're seeing this at the moment is many sort of estate agents and conveyancing firms, people are sending spoof emails saying, oh, I'm selling a property at the moment, I've just changed my bank details, so when I sell my house for £250,000, please pay me into this account instead. And people have been caught. So really is something you should always verify. You should think, does this feel right? Should I call them? Look at the email. Does it look like the typical email you would expect? Another one's phishing. I think we're all familiar with this, with people sending out requests, I guess, usually for information. People often impersonate banks, and they might say, click on this link, come and fill in this form. You know, you need to put in your bank details, and we'll be able to confirm that you're the account holder. They get really ballsy, and they get really, they look really authentic. But, you know, making your staff aware that these things exist and aware that they should be looking out for it is something that you have to do. The next one is whaling and CEO fraud. Again, we at AccessPay, we've had people try and do this to us. And, you know, luckily we've spotted them and we've cut it off. But what they'll do is they'll send an email purporting to be from your CEO or a senior member of staff, usually to someone more junior. So this requires a degree of research from the fraudster. What they'll do is they'll send an email, and it'll usually be from, like I say, the CEO, and it'll be to the finance manager. I need you to urgently pay this money from our account to such an account. It's urgent. Please, can you hurry up? Like I said earlier, people aren't used to doubting or questioning their boss, so people just fall victim to this. One way in which I heard a story recently about somebody managed to identify that this was fraudulent, and the way they were able to identify that was because their CEO apparently wasn't a very nice person, and they'd ended the email with, "Have a great weekend." And they just knew that wasn't right. They knew their CEO wouldn't normally speak to them in that way, so they questioned it, and it turned out it hadn't gone from them. And finally, social engineering. Social media is something that people need to be really careful with business. There's been examples of people from businesses. They might send a tweet out and they might say, "I'm absolutely loving my Sage software." And people see that, and they might set up a Twitter account. It looks and feels like it's from Sage, and they'll say, "Oh, well, we're really happy to hear your good feedback. Why don't you fill out this survey or fill out this review of your experience with Sage, and you can win an iPad or you can win a prize." And that person might excitedly click the link, fill it out. They might tell them which Sage system they're using. They might log it. They might actually give their login details in order to prove which user they are. And then already that external fraudster has got loads of information. They might even be able to log into your finance system themselves. So there's all sorts of ways which external fraudsters will try and dupe your members of staff. And we're going to cover something. We're going to be covering another webinar in January or February around this particular area. But if you do want to do a bit more research around how you can protect yourself from those threats, there's a really interesting website called take5-stopfraud.org.uk. So this is all set up by the Financial Fraud Action UK. And it's all around stopping and thinking. It's take 5, does this feel real? You know, is my gut instinct right? So they're saying, never disclose your security details. Don't assume something is authentic. You know, go away and verify it. Don't be rushed. You know, a genuine organization who's waiting for an invoice to be paid probably won't mind waiting a day, especially when they hear the reason why you're checking. Listen to your instincts as well, especially more experienced members of staff. They get a good feeling for what is normal in their job. But even for more junior members of staff, it's around coaching them and empowering them to be able to say, well, I don't think this is real. I don't think I'm comfortable with this. So I'm going to escalate it to my manager, or I'm going to call the particular employee or supplier, and I'm going to verify that this communication was correct. And stay in control as well. Keep a level head. Don't panic, because you may find yourself falling victim to an external fraudster. So I hope you all found that useful. I guess I'm just going to take you through a couple more slides, and then we'll have some questions and answers if anybody's got any. But for anyone who doesn't know, I just wanted to take you through who AccessPay are. So you might have gathered from throughout the presentation, we sell business payment software, and we've got lots of experience in, I guess, helping businesses to improve their payments process, not only make it more efficient, not only perhaps move it to the cloud and get a better setup, but making it more secure. We get lots of people coming to us and go, we've identified an issue. Can your software help us get around this? So our motto is easier business payments. You know, we don't want to make our software difficult to use. We don't want to make it difficult for you to move to us. So that's really what we strive for, but always with, I guess, part of our mind on, is this still secure? We don't want to make it too easy. So it's a cloud-based portal. You can access it anytime, anywhere. It gives you complete control over what your internal approvals process should be. So you can control what users can see and do. You can segregate duties and visibility. And you can set up a workflow. You don't want it to take too long. You might want to make it more efficient. So you can set up workflow that once the upload has handled it, then it goes to an approver. And once the approver's done it, it goes to a submitter. Or you can set value-based limits as well. If you've got a junior member of staff who is allowed to submit, you might want to say that this person can only submit up to the value of, say, £50,000, something like that. So it allows you to put controls around the way you operate your payments process. It's got a full audit trail. It's got monitoring tools and email alerts. We can give you two-factor authentication as well to make sure that you know as a business that the person logging into that system is who they say they are. So it's things like direct credit, direct debits, faster payments. So we always talk about accounts payable, payroll, direct debit. That's what we call the holy trinity here in AccessPay. But there's also all sorts of other payment types which you can process through the system. So we talked about automated payments. I think it's very important to consider whether that's right for you. Yes, it makes it much more efficient, but you've got to be absolutely certain that you're comfortable that what you're exporting from your payroll system or your accounts payable system is ready to go and has been through enough checks and balances. So we connect to any back office system. So I've mentioned a number of systems throughout the presentation. We can connect to that as it is. There's a couple of methods of integrating. So I mentioned one earlier, secure FTP. We've got APIs. But what we say to businesses, whatever you're spitting out of your back office system, as long as the relevant information is there, then we can connect to the relevant payment network. And it's a plug and play platform. So we've done a lot of work in the last few months and years on making this a platform. It's always there, it's always online, and you can get set up in days. Because it's cloud, we operate in a software as a service model as well. So it's a fixed annual fee, 1-year rolling contract, it's free upgrades, and there's no transaction charges either. So we don't mind what you put through it. If you're growing as a business, then we're not going to punish you for it. The annual fee stays fixed, so you've got peace of mind on future costs. So that's my little spiel about AccessPay there at the end. I'd like to now, if anyone's made it through, I think we've been on about 43 minutes. So we've got a couple more minutes if anyone's still around. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you're not comfortable asking over the webinar, you are able to send me an email there. My email and contact details are down there at the bottom. But if you do have any questions, please use the chat function that you can see there in WebEx, and I'd be delighted to answer. But on a final note, thank you all for joining me, and hope you have a great Christmas. Best wishes for the holidays. So we've got a question here from Edward. Great question, by the way. How do you balance strict security controls with efficiency? So it is something I alluded to earlier on. I guess it's always a business decision. You know, nobody likes a cumbersome, inefficient payments process. Really, I think what you've got to look at is what is the potential risk for us as a business if somebody is able to defraud us? What's the financial loss we can get? And does that outweigh the amount of time we're spending sending payments? It's always a difficult question. You know, I think you can quite easily get a very, very secure payments process without compromising too much on efficiency. I think it's all about having those controls in place, both in your back office, when you're getting a file from your back office to your payment solutions, such as to AccessPay, and then having those controls at every step of the way. But if you've got a decent workflow around it, and you make sure that once one person's done their action, an email or an alert is sent on to the next person in their chain, there's no reason why you can't go from end to end, exporting a file through to submitting it in, 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, and that could be even with 3 or 4 people involved in the processing of that file. Hopefully that's answered your question, but it's a business decision. Okay, we've got one more question. So, how does the security of AccessPay compare with my online banking portal? Difficult to say. You know, banks are known for their security. Banks are also known for having security breaches. I think one of the big things that our customers feedback to us is that their banking portals are very, very secure. They're not always the most, I guess, flexible or configurable in how they allow you to operate your payments process. So whether that's to do with the file that you're uploading, whether that's to do with the approvals process that you can have. You know, because they've got lots of people using them, they're not always as motivated as, I guess, a company like ourselves would be to make it the most user-friendly. Usually it's an off-the-shelf, here's the solution, it comes as standard, go away and log in. So I would like to say just as secure, but much more configurable, and if you need it to be, much more efficient, and we can make it work for you better than perhaps a banking portal might. So thanks for that question, James. Okay, so any more questions from anybody in the audience? No? Okay, well, I'll just take you on to the final slide. I did mention earlier that we'll be sending invites out to our next webinar. I think it's February webinar. It's all on cybersecurity. So we talked about protecting yourself from internal fraud today. The next one's on external fraudsters, hacking, and how you can protect yourself from anybody out there in the big wide world who might be trying to steal from you and your business, and how you can help your staff and your IT team and anyone who manages or operates your systems from falling prey to those fraudsters. But as I said earlier, thank you all so much for joining. Hope you have a lovely weekend and best wishes for the holidays. Thank you very much.